Good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to join Ali and myself for our session today on discussing what is your ROI. So without further ado, let's get right into it. We now live in this new farming era where we're able to easily collect as-applied data spatially across an individual field or within an individual field. And then from that, we can compare and contrast that data to yield monitor data or imagery, satellite imagery. So with this new evolving ability to manage our fields on a continually smaller and smaller basis due to advancements in GPS and precision ag tech, we now have this opportunity to analyze or put a number to our level of operating success by means of profit mapping. So rather than looking strictly to yield as an indicator towards your farm's operational success, we are now able to quantify the profit spatially across the field by accounting for your variable expenses that are occurring throughout the field. And then from there, we can create a field map that shows profitability. So in terms of what is profit mapping, the name is very self-explanatory in and of itself. But profit mapping essentially takes the farm level profit calculation down to the field level, and then it further computes the profit per acre spatially across the field. So within the software we use that Ali will show you later, we are able to upload yield data, as you see on the left there, and as applied input data, and meanwhile accounting for other variable operating expenses for each field separately. And then we can compile them and create a profit map. When I mentioned the as applied data, well, that can come from your own equipment, your own yield monitor, or your own applicators for chem, FERT, seed maps, seed scripts, or it can come from our custom application that we do ourselves, and we can input them into our software that way. So those are options as well. And as you can see in this example on the right there is kind of an essential breakdown, a simple breakdown of some of the parameters we'd consider for the field, the field acreage. We also can account for land costs, which are quite variable, Ali will get into, and I'll explain these more on the next few slides. So from the yield data that you saw on the previous slide, and with the expense information that you saw on the right, we can generate this demo map, or this demo profit map, sorry, that you see on the left, with the green areas being the most profitable, and as you progress to red, you get also progressing to the least profitable areas. So from this, we can group areas of similar profitability to create profit management zones. So this can be especially helpful throughout time, as you're tracking your profit management zones to see, okay, which zones are consistently profitable across time, which zones are consistently unprofitable across time, or what zones are quite variable due to that yearly weather effect, right? So we can use these profit management zones to guide our decision-making process to help generate more profits or to help preserve profits against losses in those unprofitable zones. So, for example, some decisions that could be considered or thought about are, what areas should I reduce my inputs to recover those profits? Or what areas are already sufficient that I'm happy with and I'm just going to continue my management practices with? Or lastly, what areas show consistent losses in which money is consistently being lost, and now I have to maybe consider repurposing the land. You can also get a return on investment map or a ROI map that shows, it's essentially a map that shows for every dollar invested, what is your percent return on that dollar. So in the right table there, you can see that the field average was 8.6% ROI for this field, and then it further gets broken down based on the coloring scheme, similar to the profit map we saw before, with green being the highest return on investment, progressing to red being the lowest return on investment, or getting in the negatives there. So to generate these maps, we use a wide range of data combinations that are possible to achieve this. It's essentially whatever data is available to the grower, but we can refer to a MAFRA publication number 60, which is the annual field crop budget, which we can use that to essentially help estimate operating expenses due to OMAFRA has localized averages that we can use to help fill in the gaps, which I will explain on the next slide. In terms of data required and further expanding on the input data needed, the first step will always be to have a field boundary of sorts, which we could help generate and then confirm with you, the grower. In terms of the data layers themselves, we're able to help every step of the way with pulling and processing this data, whether it be from your combine yield monitor or your as applied data from your ChemFert or your as planted data. It can also come from our custom application equipment ourselves and input into our software. So there's many options available. A yield monitor isn't necessarily even required as well, because with imagery at certain key development stages, satellite imagery, we are able to take that and calibrate it with your scale tickets from the elevator to calibrate a falsified yield model, which we can use as well for the yield layer. So no matter what, this is kind of the basic outline. Is a field boundary. You're going to need a revenue number of sorts from yield, and then you're going to need to take that off from your expenses. So as you can see on the left, this is a template that you will find in OMAFRA Publication 60, and this guide essentially helps us guide us through reasonable cost estimates for various aspects of our operations. As you can see, all the parameters there. I won't go through them all for sake of time. If assistance is required on generating, farm expenses and filling in the gaps, these pre-built budget templates that were calculated by OMAFRA, they use local averages. So that's an option as well, to have a reasonably accurate profit map estimation. But of course, it's always better if you can dig into your own operations numbers. So in terms of why is it important to consider your spatial profitability, or how might you act on the data? It's first important to consider that we all know the areas in our fields that yield poorly, but relative to the inputs we decide to feed it or apply to those low yielding areas, are we still making a profitable business decision, or are we actually losing money? This is why sometimes chasing yield goals that aren't economically optimal may result in wasted capital. So it doesn't really tell the whole story when just looking at yield. On the right there, you can see a yield response curve that is typically seen to follow the relationship with nitrogen inputs. At a certain point, the relationship will plateau, as you can see, and any additional inputs will no longer result in a proportional yield output, which essentially results in profit losses that aren't normally seen when looking just at yield. So, especially since these input costs, if they continue to rise, we need to focus on getting the biggest bang for your buck out of these inputs. So instead of going for the absolute highest yield with the absolute highest level of investments and inputs, let's start looking at the field's profitability and saying or thinking about where should you invest that extra dollar, and we should invest it where you're going to get a dollar back plus some on your investment. Therefore, profit mapping will add another perspective when making your management decisions. Ultimately, farming is a business, and the bottom line or the profitability is an important data layer to consider when planning your cropping systems. So if you are implementing variable rate applications on your farm, for example, this is a good way to test, is it paying off? Is there ways I can modify that? How can I increase my profitability? And you can essentially look at your field and split it into zones that you're making money in for certain, you're losing money in, or where are my areas that are, I'm simply breaking even. So this adds another perspective when considering your management practices. So for agronomic next steps or acting on your ROI or your profit maps, a good first step is to look at the management zones or profit zones. And typically a good first step would be to assess the variability. There could be variability in your fields for many different reasons, from being too wet at planting and it didn't get good enough seed to soil contact, or dried out hilltops. There could be many reasons. So a good start is to do zone sampling or zone soil samples to get a good basis as to what is your yield limiting factor, or what is stressing the response on your inputs, which is reducing profit. Other standard decisions like maybe switching your varieties or switching the crop planted, or modifying your crop protection management plan or your fertility plan by introducing VR fertility scripts for NP or K, or variable seeding scripts in lower profit zones, reducing your seeding rate, or maybe addressing pH issues that you found by your soil samples. So then you do a VR lime application. Or lastly, you can consider land repurposing measures. If there is a lot of non-profitable areas, you can definitely consider land repurposing. I know that conservation authorities might offer funding or credits upwards, I've heard, to $500 an acre sometimes. So that might be a better option. Instead of losing money on those acres, cover them, have them maintain the soil structure, reduce erosion. Maybe a grass waterway might be the answer for some of these cases. So there definitely is a lot to consider when looking at these profit maps going forward and acting on them. In terms of who can benefit from profit mapping, profit mapping is available for all sizes of operations and across all types of cropping systems in which data can be available for or recorded. For operations that have their own variable rate controllers, to fields that just receive flat rates, to data from our custom applications, we can accommodate it all. And then again, the OMAFRA crop budget templates are they're a good guide to help on the expense report side of things. And then on the revenue side of things, generating a yield layer, yield monitors certainly help and are a great way to go about it. But we also have the falsified yield maps that are essentially just a model, as I said before, that can be used. So there's a lot of entry paths or ways this profit mapping could be utilized on your operation. So to conclude, it's important to remember that most fields will have this inherent variability that impacts productivity across the field. And so when we decide to manage this variability through a profit-driven perspective, we can increase our financial, agronomic, and environmental performance. So we can create crop plans that can be analyzed at the subfield level. So as you can see on the right, we can manage the red areas separately from the dark green areas, from the yellow areas, et cetera, et cetera. And we have this ability to essentially manage these high profit zones differently than these low profit zones by means of precision ag technologies and variable rate technologies. And we have the ability to work with multiple different plans on that field in terms of different nutrient blends and managing nitrogen differently than the others, or having a different lime or variable rate lime approach, meanwhile having a variable rate seeding approach. These can all be managed separately and tailored differently based on the profit zones. And now I will hand the controls over to my colleague Ali. She will take you through a demo of how profit mapping works on our side of things and gets into more of the technical aspects of it. If you have any questions, there's a chat box below in which you can type them and we will answer them shortly. But also at the end of this presentation, we will have time for questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Hi everyone, my name is Ali and I'll be walking you through a live demo here of our profit mapping tool. So first thing is first, we have our boundary drawn out for the field that we chose to do the profit mapping on. If you're struggling to decide on what field you want to try this on, I would highly suggest choosing a field that has a lot of variability in it, or a field that there are some problem areas that you want to tighten up the management strategy on, or even a field that you're paying too much in rent for. The next step would be importing our yield data. So in particular example, we got the yield data from Climate Field View, and then we just imported it into our system here. This grower in particular didn't have any variable rate as applied data or as planted data, so we just used a flat rate for that expense. Again, I kind of want to reiterate what Josh has said. We can create falsified yield maps by using satellite imagery and scale tickets. So don't shy away if you don't have yield data. And the final thing to this whole project would be your budget. So again, Josh has said there is the provincial average budget that we can use, and that is exactly what we used in this example here. But to me, it's really important to try to tailor this budget to your own operation and try and choose what you think is best for your expenses instead of just using the provincial average. So we have a list of expenses here from equipment to seed to fertilizer, chemical, grain handling, land. Again, land keeps coming up into the conversation. The question every farmer is asking is every inch of your land making you money? Are you optimizing your expensive land to its full potential? We pay land rent by the acres, but why are we paying all this money if you're not making money on every acre? So to me, this would be a great tool to utilize to show to the landowners that maybe we should be negotiating fair rental prices, or maybe you're just at the point where we should just be dropping this land that we're renting. And now on to the fun part of actually analyzing our profit map now. So there are several parameters that went into this. So our first one here would be the acreage. So this field is a total of 19 acres in size. Our average yield was 142 bushels per acre. Our profit was $60.97 per acre, giving us a positive ROI of 8.6%. Another really neat parameter that's probably one of my favorites is the acreage opportunity ratio. So what this parameter means is we are losing money on 36% of the field. This is very substantial. So 36% of this field, there's opportunity to try and make profit. Now, everyone farms for different reasons, obviously. Some people are only farming to break even and it's all about that fund per acre, whereas some people are farming to try and increase that ROI and really push their yield potential and make big profits. As we toggle over here into this map, it's fairly interactive. So I'll toggle right here on this data point here in the dark red orange area. So our yield data here shows us that we yielded 86 bushels per acre, which is pretty low. Our total expenses over this field was $713 per acre. The revenue with 86 bushels per acre was $473 per acre, giving us a negative profit of $240 per acre, giving us a negative ROI of 33%. If we toggle over here into the green area of the field where we had a higher yield of 192 bushels per acre, we had a positive profit of $342 per acre. Our ROI was a positive 48%, which is pretty good. I'd be happy with that. But I'd be happier with that if we got that across the entire field. Right here is the legend, which we can kind of generalize what's going on within this map. So 18% of this field, we are making $0. 16% of the field we're making, or we're actually losing $100 per acre. 10% of the field, we're losing $200 per acre. And the remainder 10% of this field, we are losing between $300 to $400 per acre. If we go down to the bottom here into the positives, 19% of this field we're making $100 per acre, 15% of this field we're making $200 per acre. Now there's other ways to look at this as well. One of those being the break-even commodity price. So for this particular example, we marketed the corn at $5.50 per bushel. The break even for this field, you would have to market your corn at $5.07 per bushel. And again, this map is interactive. So if I toggle here into the red zone, we would have to market our corn at $9.80 per bushel just to break even at that point. As we toggle down here into the green spot, we would only have to market our corn at $3.80 per bushel, which is essentially half of what we'd have to market it at in these lower yielding zones. We also have a break-even yield increase map. So how this map works is we would need to increase our yield by 52 bushels per acre in order to make $0 per acre. Down in here, we would only have to increase our yield by $18 per bushel per acre. And the last map here I'm going to show you is our break-even expense decrease report. So if I toggle here to this spot, we would have to decrease our expenses by $230 per acre. Now, this is a pretty high number to try and decrease our expenses by just to break even. There are ways we can try and mitigate this by doing different management strategies. So you could try variable rate seeding, variable rate nitrogen, as variable rate lime. Maybe the solution to our problem is just not farming it and putting it into some grass. So I'm also going to show you here, we can compare this yield map to different years of data. So in 2020, this was kind of an off year to the fact that we had that early frost, so the yields just weren't there. This field on average only yielded 140 bushels per acre. However, in 2019 here, we had a 200 bushel crop per acre. Even with that higher yielding crop in this year in 2019, those same areas are still producing a negative ROI per acre. Now, everyone's probably wondering what's going on in this specific spot of the field. Now I'll show you this other neat tool that we have to use. So here I'm showing you just the yield map from this field. The combine, along with the yield map, can also create a elevation layer as well. So with this GeoViewer tool that I'm going to show you, it overlays the yield data and the elevation map to create this. So how this works is your colors are your yields. So the yellow, oranges are your lower yielding areas, whereas the greens to dark blues are your highest yielding areas of the field. And then obviously the height of this shows the elevation. So here in this particular example where we're always getting that negative ROI and negative profit is right here. And we look at the elevation, it looks like it's on a sandy knoll ridge, which to me means moisture is the limiting factor. Obviously, there can be some other issues like pH or low fertility, but without having the soil tests and that data, I'm just going to come up with the assumption that with the higher elevation, it's likely a sandy knoll and moisture is our limiting yield factor here.
Thank you for that, Allie. That's all, folks. Hopefully we were able to help you gain some insight towards profit mapping. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to one of our precision ag specialists. We'll be happy to help you dig into your own operations ROI. And now we'll open up some things for questions.